In a quiet little town where everyone knew each other, 14-year-old Ethan moved to Maplewood Middle School in the middle of the semester. His family had just relocated because his dad got a new job at a nearby factory. Ethan wasn't thrilled about starting over. The hallways felt unfamiliar, the classrooms seemed too loud, and he didn't know anyone. He tried to blend in as best as he could, but it was hard when you were the new kid. Ethan wasn't like most boys his age. While others wore trendy sneakers and flashy hoodies, Ethan stuck to simple jeans and plain shirts that his mom bought on sale. His backpack was old but sturdy, patched up with duct tape after years of use. During lunch breaks, while other kids pulled out colorful snacks or ordered pizza from the cafeteria, Ethan quietly ate peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in brown paper bags. It wasn't much, but it reminded him of home, and it saved money for his family. What set Ethan apart even more was how he spent his free time. When the bell rang for recess, most students rushed outside to play basketball or gather around laughing and joking. But Ethan? He stayed indoors, tucked away in a corner of the library with his nose buried in a book. Science fiction novels were his favorite escape, a world full of adventure, far away from the challenges of real life. Sometimes teachers noticed him scribbling notes in the margins or sketching spaceships on scrap paper. They thought he was smart, maybe even gifted, but no one really took the time to get to know him better. It didn't take long for some kids to notice Ethan's differences, and unfortunately, not in a good way. A group of popular boys led by Brandon, the self-proclaimed king of 7th grade, quickly zeroed in on him. Brandon was tall for his age, with a confident swagger that made others follow him without question. He thrived on being the center of attention and loved making people laugh, even if it came at someone else's expense. At first, their teasing was harmless enough. They'd call out mockingly, "Hey, Space Cadet," whenever Ethan walked by, referencing his love for sci-fi books. Or they'd snicker about his clothes, calling them thrift store specials. Ethan didn't respond. He kept his head down, pretending not to hear them. But deep inside, their words stung. Every laugh felt like a tiny needle pricking his confidence. Brandon and his friends weren't done yet. One day during math class, Ethan reached into his pencil case only to find it empty. Someone had stolen all his pens and pencils again. He sighed quietly, trying not to draw attention to himself, and asked the teacher for extras. Later, he found his belongings scattered across the floor near his locker, his textbooks smeared with sticky syrup. Again, Ethan cleaned everything, up silently, refusing to give the bullies the satisfaction of seeing him upset. The truth was, Ethan wasn't weak. He was simply choosing not to fight back. Little did anyone know, beneath his calm exterior lay a strength few could imagine. But for now he remained silent, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. Or perhaps, for the moment when he'd finally have to stand up for himself. As the days turned into weeks, the bullying didn't stop. It only got worse. At first, Brandon and his group thought it was all fun and games. They'd nudge each other in the hallway and smirk whenever Ethan walked by, whispering jokes about his space adventures or how he probably talked to aliens at night. But soon their teasing grew meaner, more personal and harder to ignore. One morning, Ethan arrived at school to find his locker covered in crude drawings. Someone had used a permanent marker to scrawl words like weirdo and loser across the metal surface. The sight made his stomach churn, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he grabbed some wet wipes from his bag and started scrubbing. A few students passing by noticed, but looked away quickly, pretending not to see. No one wanted to get involved, not when Brandon and his crew were watching nearby, laughing and high-fiving each other. The harassment spilled over into class too. During science lab, Ethan's lab partner, one of Brandon's friends, accidentally knocked over a beaker of water, soaking Ethan's notebook and ruining hours of carefully written notes. When Ethan tried to explain what happened to the teacher, the boy shrugged innocently. "It was an accident," he said with a grin, while Brandon snickered from across the room. The teacher sighed and told Ethan to borrow someone else's notes, unaware of the humiliation simmering beneath the surface. Things escalated further during gym class. Ethan wasn't athletic, which made him an easy target for ridicule. One day, during a game of dodgeball, Brandon deliberately aimed the ball straight at Ethan's face. It hit him hard enough to leave a red mark on his cheek. The entire class erupted in laughter, except for Ethan, who stood frozen, clutching his glasses that had nearly fallen off. The gym teacher blew the whistle and scolded Brandon for being reckless, but it hardly mattered. The damage was done. Even online, there was no escape. One evening, while Ethan was working on homework, he opened his laptop to check social media. His heart sank when he saw screenshots of his old family photos posted on a meme page created by Brandon's group. Someone had added captions mocking his clothes and hairstyle, turning his private moments into public jokes. Comments flooded in from classmates, some joining in on the teasing, others just scrolling past without saying a word. Ethan stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness wash over him. Despite everything, Ethan refused to break. He never cried in front of them, never raised his voice, and never complained to teachers or his parents. On the outside, he remained calm and composed, but inside, the weight of their cruelty was crushing him. Each insult chipped away at his confidence, making him question whether he deserved any of this. Was he really as strange and worthless as they claimed? What the bullies didn't realize was that every taunt, every prank, and every cruel joke was adding fuel to a fire they couldn't see. Ethan's silence wasn't weakness, it was restraint. Beneath his quiet demeanor lay years of discipline and training, skills honed through countless hours of practice. He knew how to defend himself if he ever needed to, but he also knew the importance of patience. For now, he chose to endure, biding his time until the moment came when he could no longer stay silent. And though none of them realized it yet, that moment was closer than they thought. What Brandon and his friends didn't know, and what no one at school suspected, was that Ethan had a secret. It wasn't something he talked about or showed off. In fact, he rarely mentioned it to anyone outside his family. But every evening, after school, Ethan would walk to a small dojo on the edge of town, where he trained in martial arts under the watchful eye of his uncle, a former competitive fighter. Ethan's journey in martial arts began when he was just 6 years old. His parents had enrolled him in classes hoping it would help him gain confidence and stay active. At first, Ethan struggled. The kicks were awkward, the stances felt unnatural, and sparring left him bruised and frustrated. But his uncle encouraged him to keep going, teaching him that martial arts weren't just about fighting. It was about respect, self-control, and inner strength. Over time, Ethan grew stronger, not just physically but mentally too. He learned how to focus, how to stay calm under pressure, and most importantly, how to protect himself without letting anger take over. By the time he turned 14, Ethan had mastered several styles of martial arts, including karate and taekwondo. His uncle often praised him for his discipline and precision, saying he had a natural talent for reading people's movements. But despite his skill, Ethan never used it to show off or intimidate others. To him, martial arts was a personal journey, a way to build character rather than dominance. He carried that philosophy with him everywhere, even into the hostile hallways of Maplewood Middle School. At home, Ethan's room was filled with trophies and medals from competitions, though they were tucked away on a high shelf where visitors wouldn't notice them. His parents were proud of his achievements, but they also worried about him. They saw how quiet he'd become since starting at the new school, and sensed that something was weighing heavily on his mind. One night, as Ethan practiced his forms, in the backyard, his mom approached him cautiously. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Ethan hesitated before answering, then shook his head. "It's nothing, Mom, just some kids being mean. I can handle it." His parents exchanged worried glances but decided not to push him further. They trusted Ethan to make the right decisions, knowing how mature he was for his age. Still, they couldn't shake the feeling that the bullying was affecting him more than he let on. What they didn't realize was that Ethan's training was helping him cope. Every punch, kick, and block in the dojo gave him an outlet for his frustration. Each session reminded him of the values his uncle had instilled in him: patience, humility, and the importance of using his skills responsibly. Even so, Ethan knew he couldn't avoid conflict forever. As the bullying continued to escalate, he found himself replaying scenarios in his head. What he could say or do if things got out of hand. Part of him hoped it wouldn't come to that. He didn't want to resort to violence unless absolutely necessary. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of discipline and preparation, knew he was ready if it did. Ethan's classmates saw him as quiet and unassuming, someone who blended into the background. They had no idea that beneath his calm exterior lay a reservoir of strength and control. And while he hoped the bullies would eventually leave him alone, deep down, he understood that sometimes silence wasn't enough. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant showing the world exactly who you were and what you were capable of. One chilly afternoon after school, Ethan was walking home alone, his backpack slung over one shoulder. The air smelled faintly of autumn leaves and the streets were quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind. He had taken a shortcut through the bike racks behind the school, a route he often used to avoid crowded hallways. But today, that decision would change everything. Ethan rounded the corner. He froze. There they were, Brandon and 3 of his friends leaning casually against the fence with smug grins on their faces. They must have been waiting for him. Ethan's heart sank, but he forced himself to keep moving forward, hoping they'd let him pass without incident. No such luck. Well, well, Brandon drawled, stepping into Ethan's path. Look who we've got here. Space Cadet decided to show up. Ethan stopped, clutching the strap of his backpack tightly. He didn't say a word, just stared at them with an expressionless face. His silence only seemed to irritate Brandon more. You think you're too good to talk to us? Brandon sneered, taking another step closer. Or are you just scared? The others laughed nervously, egging Brandon on. One of them grabbed Ethan's backpack and yanked it off his shoulder before he could react. Another shoved him lightly, causing him to stumble backward. Ethan clenched his fists but remained still, his eyes scanning the group. He knew better than to lash out blindly. He had trained for this kind of situation, and he wasn't about to lose control now. But then, things went too far. With a mocking laugh, one of the boys dumped Ethan's backpack onto the ground and kicked it into a nearby puddle, splashing mud everywhere. Papers floated out, soaking wet and ruined. Ethan felt something snap inside him. All the weeks of bullying, the insults, the pranks, the stolen belongings, it all boiled down to this moment. Enough was enough. Without saying a word, Ethan straightened up, his posture shifting subtly. His shoulders relaxed, his feet planted firmly on the ground, and his hands hung loosely by his sides. For the first time, there was no trace of fear in his eyes, only calm determination. The bullies noticed the change immediately. Their laughter faded, replaced by confusion and unease. What's your problem? Brandon snapped, trying to sound tough. You gonna cry or something? Instead of answering, Ethan moved. In one fluid motion, he sidestepped Brandon's clumsy attempt to grab him and caught the arm of another boy who lunged forward. With minimal effort, Ethan twisted the boy's wrist, forcing him to drop to his knees with a yelp. Before anyone could react, Ethan spun around and swept Brandon's legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the pavement. The remaining 2 boys hesitated, unsure what to do. Ethan turned to face them, his movements deliberate and controlled. I don't want to hurt you, he said evenly, his voice cutting through the tense silence. But I won't let you push me around anymore. For a moment, no one moved. Then, realizing they were outmatched, the 2 boys backed away, pulling their fallen friends with them. Brandon scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. This isn't over, he shouted, though his voice wavered. Ethan didn't respond. He simply bent down, picked up his soggy backpack, and walked away, leaving the bullies staring after him in stunned silence. None of them dared to follow. The next day at school, whispers buzzed like wildfire through the hallways. By lunchtime, nearly everyone had heard about what happened behind the bike racks. Some students claimed Ethan had flipped Brandon over his shoulder like a professional wrestler. Others said he'd taken down all 4 bullies in less than 10 seconds. The details grew more exaggerated with each retelling, but one thing was clear. Ethan wasn't someone to mess with anymore. At first, Brandon and his friends tried to brush it off. They laughed nervously whenever anyone brought it up, insisting they'd let him win because they didn't want to hurt him. But their body language told a different story. They avoided eye contact with Ethan in the halls, ducking into classrooms or turning corners quickly when they saw him approaching. Their usual bravado was gone, replaced by unease and shame. Even their closest allies began distancing themselves, sensing the shift in power. For Ethan, life at school changed almost overnight. Students who had once ignored him or even joined in on the teasing now greeted him with cautious respect. A few kids even apologized for not standing up for him earlier. During recess, a group of younger students approached him shyly, asking if the rumors were true. Did he really know martial arts? Could he teach them some moves? Ethan smiled politely, but kept his answers vague. He didn't want attention, and he certainly didn't want to be seen as a hero. To him, what happened was simply self-defense, not something to boast about. Teachers noticed the change too. Mr. Carter, the history teacher, pulled Ethan aside after class one day. "I heard about what happened," he said gently. "Are you okay?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for asking." Mr. Carter hesitated, then added, "You handled yourself well. It takes real strength to stand up for yourself without losing control. Just let me know if those boys give you any trouble again." Ethan appreciated the concern, but he doubted he'd need help. After the incident, Brandon and his crew seemed determined to stay out of his way. In fact, they looked downright miserable. Gone were the smug grins and swaggering walks. They slouched through the halls now, avoiding conversations and keeping their heads down. It was as though the weight of their actions had finally caught up with them. Despite everything, Ethan felt no sense of triumph. If anything, he felt a quiet sadness. He hadn't wanted to fight back, he'd only wanted to be left alone. Now every glance from his former tormentors reminded him of how far things had spiraled out of control. Still, he couldn't deny that. A small part of him felt relieved. For the first time since starting at Maplewood Middle School, he could walk the halls without fear. The bullies had learned their lesson, and word had spread. Ethan wasn't someone to underestimate. One afternoon during gym class, the coach divided the students into teams for a game of dodgeball. Normally, Ethan would have been picked last, but this time things were different. When it came time to choose players, the team captains argued over who got to have him. Ethan raised an eyebrow in surprise but said nothing as he joined his assigned team. As the game began, he moved with precision, dodging balls with ease and throwing with surprising accuracy. His teammates cheered wildly every time he made a play, and even kids from the opposing team couldn't help but admire his skill. By the end of the game, Ethan's team had won, thanks in large part to his efforts. For the first time in months, he allowed himself a small smile. Maybe this new chapter wouldn't be so bad after all. The buzz around Ethan didn't die down anytime soon. If anything, it grew louder as more students pieced together the story of what had happened behind the bike racks. Some kids started calling him the ninja, while others referred to him as martial arts kid. Though Ethan found the nicknames a little embarrassing, he couldn't deny that his reputation had shifted dramatically. People who had once ignored him now went out of their way to say hello in the hallways or sit near him at lunch. Even teachers seemed to treat him differently, giving him nods of approval or offering encouraging smiles. But amidst all the newfound attention, one surprising thing happened. Brandon showed up at Ethan's locker one morning. At first, Ethan thought he was imagining it. Why would Brandon, of all people, approach him after everything that had happened? But there he was, standing awkwardly with his hands shoved into his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Hey," Brandon mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Can I talk to you for a sec?" Ethan closed his locker slowly and turned to face him. He didn't say anything, just waited silently, his expression unreadable. Brandon swallowed hard, clearly, struggling to find the right words. "I just wanted to say sorry," Brandon blurted out finally. "For everything. You know, the stuff me and my friends did. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely convinced. "Why now?" he asked calmly. Brandon shrugged, still looking uncomfortable. "I don't know. I guess I realized we were being jerks. And after, the other day." He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "We shouldn't have messed with you. It was stupid." For a moment, Ethan studied him carefully. He could tell Brandon wasn't just saying this because he felt cornered. He genuinely looked regretful. Still, Ethan didn't let his guard down completely. "It's not just about me," Ethan said quietly. "You've done this to other people, too, haven't you? Do they know you're sorry?" Brandon winced, guilt flashing across his face. "No, not really. But I'm trying to fix things, okay? I mean, I don't expect you to forgive me or anything, but yeah, I'm sorry." Ethan hesitated before nodding slightly. "Okay," he said simply. "Just don't do it again." That brief conversation marked the beginning of a slow transformation, not just for Brandon but for his entire group. Over the next few weeks, they made noticeable efforts to change their behavior. They stopped teasing younger students in the cafeteria and even apologized to a few kids they'd bullied in the past. It wasn't perfect, they still slipped up sometimes, but it was clear they were trying. Word spread quickly about Brandon's apology, and some students were skeptical. "Do you think he really means it?" one girl whispered to her friend during science class. Others, however, gave him credit for taking responsibility. Slowly but surely, Brandon began rebuilding trust within the school community. Meanwhile, Ethan's life settled into a new rhythm. While he still preferred quiet moments alone, he also found himself forming unexpected friendships. A boy named Lucas, who shared his love for sci-fi novels, started sitting with him at lunch. A girl named Mia, known for her sharp wit and kindness, often joined them, teasing Ethan about his superhero status while genuinely appreciating his calm demeanor. For the first time, Ethan felt like he belonged somewhere. Even the teachers noticed the positive changes. Mrs. Patel, the art teacher, encouraged Ethan to enter a local drawing contest after seeing some of his sketches in class. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Ethan won second place. When the principal announced his achievement over the intercom, the entire school erupted in applause. Ethan stood at the back of the auditorium, blushing furiously but smiling, despite himself. As the weeks passed, Maplewood Middle School began to feel less like a battleground and more like a community. The bullies weren't gone entirely. There would always be challenges, but the atmosphere had shifted. Respect replaced fear, and empathy took root where cruelty once thrived. And at the center of it all was Ethan, the quiet boy who had chosen strength over anger and grace over revenge. Brandon's apology marked the start of something unexpected, a ripple effect that spread far beyond Ethan and his former tormentors. Once word got out that Brandon had apologized, and meant it, other students began to rethink their own actions. Some kids who had laughed along with the bullies or stayed silent when they saw someone being picked on started feeling uneasy about their role in the school's culture. It was as if Brandon's change of heart gave them permission to reflect on their behavior and consider how they could do better. For Brandon, apologizing to Ethan was just the beginning. He knew he couldn't undo all the harm he'd caused, but he wanted to make amends where he could. One afternoon, he approached a shy 8th grader named Sarah, who had been one of his frequent targets. She looked startled when Brandon sat down next to her at lunch, unsure what to expect. "Hey, I just wanted to say sorry," Brandon said awkwardly. "I was a jerk to you last year. I shouldn't have done that." Sarah blinked, surprised by his sincerity. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "Thanks for saying that," she replied softly. Her response seemed to lift a weight off Brandon's shoulders, and he left the table feeling a little lighter than before. Encouraged by this small victory, Brandon convinced his friends to join him in making amends. Together, they reached out to other students they had wronged, offering sincere apologies and promising to treat everyone with more respect moving forward. Not everyone accepted their apologies right away. Some were understandably hesitant, but even those tough conversations sparked meaningful change. Slowly, trust began to rebuild. The transformation wasn't limited to Brandon's group. Other students took notice of their efforts and started stepping up too. A few older kids organized a peer mentoring program, pairing upperclassmen with younger students who might be struggling to fit in. Teachers noticed the shift as well and worked to foster a kinder environment by hosting workshops on empathy and conflict resolution. The entire school seemed to breathe easier, as though a dark cloud had finally lifted. Ethan watched all of this unfold from the sidelines, quietly impressed by how much things had improved. He didn't seek recognition for sparking the change. It wasn't why he had stood up for himself, but he couldn't deny that his actions had played a part. When Mrs. Patel, the art teacher, asked him to speak during a school assembly about kindness and standing up for others, Ethan hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't his thing, and he didn't want to draw attention to himself. But eventually he agreed, knowing it might help reinforce the positive momentum. Standing at the podium, Ethan felt nervous but determined. He spoke briefly, sharing how bullying had affected him and how important it was to treat others with respect. It's not always easy to stand up for yourself or for someone else, he admitted. But sometimes doing the right thing makes all the difference. His words resonated deeply with the audience, earning heartfelt applause. By the end of the semester, Maplewood Middle School felt like a different place. Students who had once feared walking the halls now did so with confidence. Friendships formed across grade levels, and acts of kindness became more common than teasing. Even the teachers remarked on the shift, praising the students for coming together to create a safer, more supportive community. As for Brandon, he wasn't the same person he'd been at the start of the year. Gone was the arrogance and cruelty. In its place was humility and a genuine desire to lead by example. Though he still had moments of doubt, he reminded himself daily that growth took time and that every effort mattered. Ethan, meanwhile, continued to focus on what brought him joy: martial arts, drawing, and exploring new worlds through books. He remained soft-spoken and unassuming, but there was a quiet strength about him now, one that inspired those around him without him even realizing. In standing up for himself, he hadn't just changed his own life. He'd helped transform an entire school. And that perhaps was the greatest victory of all. By the time the school year drew to a close, Maplewood Middle School was almost unrecognizable from the place it had been just months earlier. The hallways were no longer filled with whispers of fear or laughter at someone else's expense. Instead, students greeted each other warmly, and even the quieter kids seemed more comfortable stepping out of their shells. Ethan, once an outsider who blended into the background, had become a quiet but steady presence that many looked up to. Not because he sought attention, but because of the way he carried himself. Calm, kind, and unwaveringly strong. Ethan's life had changed in ways he never expected. He still loved spending his free time reading sci-fi novels and practicing martial arts, but now he also enjoyed moments with his new friends. Lucas often joined him during lunch, chatting excitedly about their favorite book series while Mia teased them both good-naturedly, her humor lighting up the room. For the first time, Ethan felt like he truly belonged somewhere, and it wasn't because people admired his skills or feared him. It was because they saw him for who he was, a thoughtful, talented, and compassionate person. Brandon and his former gang continued to work hard on rebuilding trust within the school community. They weren't perfect. There were days when old habits crept back in, but they genuinely wanted to make amends. Brandon took on leadership roles in school activities, encouraging others to get involved and helping organize events that brought students together. During one such event, a charity fundraiser for a local animal shelter, he stood beside Ethan, thanking him quietly for inspiring him to change. "You didn't have to forgive me," Brandon said earnestly, "but you did, and it made me realize I can do better." Ethan simply smiled and shrugged. "We all make mistakes," he replied. "What matters is what we do next." As graduation approached, the school held its annual awards ceremony. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Ethan was called to the stage not once but twice. First, he received an award for academic excellence, recognizing his consistent hard work and creativity. Then he was honored with a special commendation for promoting kindness and resilience among his peers. The entire auditorium erupted in applause as Ethan accepted the second award, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. When the principal asked if he wanted to say a few words, Ethan hesitated before leaning into the microphone. "I'm not great at speeches," he began, earning a chuckle from the crowd. "But I will say this. Everyone has the power to make a difference, even in small ways. Being kind doesn't cost anything, and standing up for yourself or someone else can change everything. So let's keep doing that. Together." His simple yet heartfelt message left a lasting impression on everyone present. Teachers nodded approvingly, parents wiped away tears, and students exchanged glances, inspired by his words. Even Brandon clapped louder than anyone else, a proud grin spreading across his face. That summer, as Ethan prepared to enter high school, he reflected on how far he'd come since moving to Maplewood. What had started as a challenging chapter in his life had turned into one of growth, for him and for those around him. He knew there would always be obstacles ahead, but he faced them with confidence, knowing he could handle whatever came his way. The story of Ethan's journey spread beyond the walls of Maplewood Middle School. Parents talked about it at PTA meetings. Teachers shared it as an example of resilience and empathy, and students carried its lessons with them wherever they went. Years later, alumni would still recall the boy who stood up to bullies, not with anger but with strength and grace, and inspired an entire school to be better. In the end, Ethan proved that true strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about staying true to yourself and using your gifts wisely. His actions reminded everyone that even the quietest voices can spark the loudest changes. And sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't just about protecting your own dignity. It's about showing others the path to theirs.